What if I told you that the difference between the life you are living right now and the life you keep dreaming about is not luck, not talent, and not even opportunity, but something far simpler and far more uncomfortable? It's how you read, not how fast you read, not how many books you finish, but how deeply you allow one idea to actually change the way you think, the way you decide, and the way you act when nobody is watching. Because right now there are people sitting in the same country with the same 24 hours, the same struggles, the same pressure, and yet their results are completely different. Some are building wealth, some are building discipline, some are building freedom, while others are stuck repeating the same year of their life over and over again. And here's the truth most people don't want to hear. They've already been exposed to the answers. They've already read the books, they've already watched the videos, but they never learned how to use what they learned. So today is different because this is not about motivation. This is not about feeling inspired for a few minutes and then going back to old habits. This is about learning how to read in a way that actually rewires your thinking and forces results to show up in your real life. If you stay with this message until the end, you're going to understand something most people never figure out. Why knowledge alone never changes your life and what actually does. But only if you listen like your future depends on it, because in many ways it does. Reading with intention instead of entertainment is the first real shift that separates passive readers from people who actually change their lives. Most people pick up a book with a hidden expectation of comfort. They want motivation, a good feeling, maybe a few inspiring lines they can post or remember for a moment. But intention changes the entire relationship with the page. When you read with intention, you are no longer trying to get through the material. You are trying to extract value from it like a miner searching for gold in a deep layer of rock. Every paragraph becomes a potential instruction, not just information. Every sentence becomes something you examine for usefulness, not just meaning. This mindset forces you to slow down naturally because your goal is no longer speed, it is depth. And depth is where transformation begins. When reading is treated like entertainment, the mind stays on the surface. You move quickly, you nod along, you feel inspired, but nothing actually enters your behavior. It becomes consumption without consequence. But when reading is intentional, you start filtering everything through one question. How can this change my life right now? That question alone creates a completely different mental state. Suddenly, you're not reading about success, discipline, or wealth as abstract ideas. You are measuring each concept against your current habits, your decisions, your excuses, your daily routine. You begin to notice gaps between what you know and what you do. That gap is uncomfortable, but it is also where growth begins. Intentional reading also eliminates distraction. You are not reading while scrolling mentally, thinking about notifications or unrelated tasks. You are fully engaged, almost like a conversation with yourself through the text. This level of focus turns even a simple idea into something powerful because your mind is actively connecting it to real situations in your life. For example, if you read about discipline, you are not just understanding the definition. You are thinking about the exact moment you delayed something important yesterday, or the habit you keep breaking every morning. The book stops being external and starts becoming personal. This way of reading also builds responsibility. You stop blaming lack of knowledge because you realize knowledge was never the issue. Application was. So instead of collecting more books or more ideas, you start extracting meaning from fewer pages but with greater intensity. One page read with intention can do more for your life than an entire book read casually. Over time, this approach trains your mind to look for usefulness in everything, not just books. Conversations, experiences, failures, and even setbacks start becoming material for growth because your brain is conditioned to search for lessons instead of entertainment. The idea that one powerful concept can change your entire life is something most people intellectually agree with, but rarely practice in reality. The reason is simple. Most readers are conditioned to value quantity over depth. They believe progress comes from finishing more books, reading more pages, or collecting more information. But transformation does not work that way. Real change happens when a single idea is understood deeply enough to alter behavior. One insight, fully absorbed and applied, can disrupt years of limitation because it does not stay in the mind as theory, it enters action, and action reshapes outcomes. When you slow down and treat reading as a search for that one life-changing principle, you stop treating every chapter equally. Instead, your mind begins scanning for resonance, something that feels personally relevant, almost uncomfortable in its accuracy. That moment is important because it signals connection between knowledge and your real-life situation. When you adopt this approach, reading becomes selective instead of scattered. You are no longer trying to remember everything. You are trying to recognize the idea that speaks directly to your current struggle, your current habits, or your current limitations. This creates a deeper level of engagement because your mind is actively filtering, comparing, and questioning. For example, you may read 10 pages filled with multiple concepts, but only one sentence might challenge how you manage time, how you make decisions, or how you respond to failure. Instead of moving past it quickly, you pause. You reflect on how this single idea plays out in your daily routine. You connect it to real experiences, missed opportunities, procrastinated tasks, or moments where discipline broke down. In that moment, the idea stops being general wisdom and becomes personal truth. The power of focusing on one idea also lies in its ability to simplify execution. Most people fail not because they lack knowledge, but because they are overwhelmed by too much of it. Too many ideas create confusion, and confusion leads to inaction. But when you choose one principle and commit to it, clarity replaces overload. That clarity makes action easier because your mind is no longer divided. It is focused on one direction. For instance, if the idea is discipline, then everything in your day starts getting evaluated through that lens. Your decisions become sharper, your excuses become easier to identify, your priorities become more obvious. Over time, this method creates a compounding effect. One idea applied consistently begins to shape identity, and identity is what drives long-term behavior. You stop being someone who simply knows concepts and start becoming someone who lives them. That shift only requires depth, not volume. It requires the courage to ignore everything else temporarily so that one truth can fully integrate into thought patterns, emotional responses, and daily actions, eventually influencing how decisions are made under pressure, how setbacks are handled, and how progress is measured in real time. Turning reading into thinking time is the moment where passive consumption transforms into real intellectual ownership. Most people believe reading is about moving their eyes across words, but in reality, reading only becomes powerful when the mind slows down enough to engage with what is being said. Thinking during reading means you are no longer just receiving information, you are processing, questioning, challenging, and reshaping it based on your own life experience. Instead of rushing through paragraphs, you pause and allow ideas to interact with your personal reality. You begin to ask deeper questions such as why a principle works, when it applies, and how it contradicts your current behavior. This shift changes the role of the reader from a consumer of ideas to a creator of meaning. When you read without thinking, information passes through the mind like water through a sieve. It looks productive, but nothing stays. You might remember a few phrases, but there is no internal restructuring of thought. However, when you intentionally turn reading into thinking time, every concept becomes a trigger for reflection. A sentence about discipline is no longer just advice, it becomes a mirror that shows your inconsistent habits. A passage about success is no longer motivational fluff, it becomes a comparison between your goals and your current daily actions. This process naturally slows you down, but that slowness is not a weakness. It is the very space where understanding forms. Thinking while reading also creates mental dialogue. Instead of agreeing or disagreeing quickly, your mind starts debating with the text. You imagine scenarios where the idea would work and situations where it might fail. You connect it to past experiences where similar principles either helped or hurt your progress. This internal conversation deepens comprehension far beyond surface-level understanding. You are no longer memorizing content, you are integrating it into your reasoning system. The idea becomes something you can explain, defend, and apply because it has been mentally tested against your own reality. Another powerful effect of turning reading into thinking time is self-awareness. As you reflect on what you read, you begin to see patterns in your behavior that were previously invisible. You notice how often you delay important actions, how easily distractions pull your attention, or how certain beliefs limit your decisions. This awareness is not theoretical, it is immediate and personal. The book becomes less about external success stories and more about internal correction. You start recognizing gaps between knowledge and behavior in real time, and that recognition creates pressure for change. This approach also strengthens focus. In a world where attention is constantly fragmented, slowing down to think trains the mind to stay with one idea longer than usual. It builds mental endurance. Instead of jumping from concept to concept, you learn to sit with a single thought until it reveals deeper layers of meaning. Over time, this practice rewires how you engage with all information, not just books. Conversations become more meaningful, decisions become more deliberate, and learning becomes less about accumulation and more about transformation. Writing it down instead of just consuming it is the point where knowledge stops floating in the mind and starts taking a permanent shape. Most people underestimate writing because they treat it like an optional step, something only students or planners do. But in reality, writing is the bridge between understanding and retention. When you read something powerful and simply move on, your brain treats it as temporary information. It may feel clear in the moment, but it quickly fades because there is no physical or structured anchor holding it in place. Writing forces that anchor to form. The moment you put an idea into words on paper, your mind is required to slow down, organize, and clarify what it actually understood rather than what it thinks it understood. When you write, something subtle but powerful happens in your thinking process. You are no longer just receiving ideas, you are reconstructing them. You take abstract thoughts from a book or passage and translate them into your own language. This translation process is where real learning begins. If you cannot explain an idea in your own words, it means it has not fully integrated into your thinking. Writing exposes that gap immediately. It reveals confusion, highlights unclear areas, and forces your mind to refine the idea until it becomes coherent. This is why writing is not just documentation, it is mental refinement. Another powerful aspect of writing is that it creates ownership of ideas. A concept you read is borrowed, but a concept you write becomes yours. Even if the idea originated from someone else, the moment you process it, interpret it, and express it through your own structure, it becomes part of your thinking system. Over time, this builds intellectual confidence because you are no longer dependent on remembering vague ideas. You have a personal record of insights that you can return to, reflect on, and build upon. This also prevents the illusion of understanding where something feels familiar but is not truly mastered. Writing also deepens emotional connection to ideas. When you physically write something that challenges your habits or mindset, it creates a stronger imprint in your awareness. You are not just observing the idea, you are actively engaging with it through movement, attention, and structure. This engagement strengthens memory and increases the likelihood of application. For example, writing down a principle about discipline and then reflecting on where you failed recently makes the gap between knowledge and behavior more visible and harder to ignore. Over time, this practice builds a personal knowledge system. Instead of relying on memory alone, you develop a structured collection of thoughts that evolve with you. Each written note becomes a snapshot of your thinking at a specific stage of growth. Revisiting these notes allows you to see progress, recognize patterns, and refine your mindset further. Writing transforms learning from something temporary into something continuously evolving, where ideas are not just consumed and forgotten, but preserved, sharpened, and gradually embedded into identity and decision-making habits that influence how challenges are approached and how choices are made in everyday situations. Applying ideas immediately, even in the smallest possible way, is where knowledge finally crosses the line into real-life change. Most people stop short of this stage because they confuse understanding with progress. They believe that once an idea makes sense in their mind, the work is done. But understanding is only potential energy. Without action, it has no direction and no impact. Immediate application is what converts that stored potential into movement, and movement is what creates results. When you read something powerful and delay action, the idea begins to fade, weaken, and lose emotional intensity. The mind naturally moves on to new distractions, and what once felt important becomes just another forgotten insight. But when you act immediately, even in a small way, you lock that idea into reality before doubt has time to interfere. Immediate action works because it short-circuits overthinking. The longer you wait, the more your mind creates resistance. It starts generating excuses, analyzing risks, and questioning whether the idea is practical. This mental noise often kills momentum before it even begins. But when you act quickly, you bypass that internal resistance. You do not give fear enough time to build a case against your decision. Even a tiny step like writing down a plan, making a phone call, changing a routine, or adjusting a behavior signals to your brain that the idea is real and important. This creates psychological alignment between thought and behavior, which is where real transformation begins. Another important aspect of immediate application is that it turns learning into experience. Reading about discipline is theoretical until you actually choose discipline in a real moment of temptation. Reading about focus is abstract until you deliberately remove distractions and commit to a task. The moment you apply an idea, you stop being someone who simply knows it and start becoming someone who practices it. This shift is subtle but powerful because identity is not built through knowledge alone but through repeated behavior. Every small action reinforces a new version of yourself. Starting small is crucial because it removes pressure. Many people fail to apply ideas because they wait for the perfect moment or perfect conditions. But immediate application does not require perfection, it requires initiation. A small action creates momentum, and momentum is what makes bigger actions possible. Once you begin, even imperfectly, your mind adjusts to movement instead of hesitation. This creates a cycle where action produces confidence, and confidence produces more action. Over time, immediate application changes how you relate to information itself. You stop consuming ideas passively and start evaluating them based on usability. Every concept becomes something you test in real time rather than something you admire from a distance. This practical engagement builds a stronger feedback loop between learning and living. You begin to notice which ideas actually improve your behavior and which ones remain theoretical. This filtering process sharpens your thinking and removes unnecessary mental clutter. Eventually, your learning becomes more focused, your actions become more deliberate, and your results begin to reflect what has been consistently implemented in daily choices, repeated decisions, and the willingness to turn insight into execution without delay. Repetition builds belief is one of the most overlooked principles in personal transformation because most people assume belief is created by a single powerful moment of inspiration. In reality, belief is not born instantly. It is constructed slowly through repeated exposure to the same idea until the mind stops questioning it and starts accepting it as truth. When you encounter an idea once, it feels interesting. When you encounter it twice, it feels familiar. But when you encounter it repeatedly, it begins to feel like reality. This gradual shift is what changes behavior, because the human mind does not act consistently on what it occasionally hears, but on what it repeatedly accepts without resistance. Repetition works by weakening doubt over time. The first time you read a concept like discipline, success mindset, or persistence, your mind may agree in theory but still feel skeptical in practice. That skepticism is natural because your current identity is built on past habits and experiences. However, when you revisit the same idea again and again, especially in different contexts or emotional states, it starts to integrate into your internal belief system. Each repetition adds emotional weight and familiarity is what transforms ideas into convictions. What once felt like motivation slowly becomes a standard of thinking. Another important effect of repetition is reinforcement under different mental conditions. You may read an idea when you're inspired, but that alone is not enough. When you revisit it during low motivation, stress, or distraction, it begins to prove its relevance in real-life situations. This is where belief strengthens. It is not built in comfort, but in consistency. Each time you return to the same principle and still find value in it, your mind begins to trust it more deeply. That trust is what eventually turns knowledge into identity. Repetition also creates mental conditioning. Just like physical training strengthens muscles through repeated stress, the mind strengthens belief through repeated exposure. The more frequently you encounter a principle, the more automatic your thinking aligns with it. For example, repeatedly reading about persistence gradually shifts your internal response to challenges. Instead of quitting quickly, your default reaction begins to shift toward trying again. This does not happen suddenly. It happens through accumulation of repeated reinforcement until the idea becomes you. Or a natural response rather than a forced decision. Over time, repetition removes internal conflict. At the beginning, there is often a gap between what you know and what you do, but as exposure continues, that gap begins to close. The mind stops debating whether an idea is true and starts assuming it is true. Once that shift happens, behavior becomes easier because you are no longer fighting your own beliefs. Actions become more aligned, decisions become more consistent, and discipline feels less like effort and more like identity. Eventually, repeated ideas stop being external lessons and start functioning as internal rules that guide thought patterns, shape reactions, influence decisions under pressure, and define the standards by which daily choices are evaluated without conscious struggle. And now, as we bring this message to a close, remember this truth with full clarity. Success is never locked inside books, videos, or ideas alone. It is locked inside what you choose to do with them. You can read the most powerful principles in the world. You can understand every strategy, every mindset shift, every secret of achievement, but until you turn them into daily action, they remain only potential. The real difference between those who stay stuck and those who rise is not access to knowledge, but commitment to apply it when no one is watching, when motivation is low, and when life feels ordinary. So don't let these ideas stay as inspiration for a moment and then fade into distraction. Take them seriously. Read with intention. Think deeply. Find that one idea that speaks directly to your situation and act on it without delay. Write it down, make it real, and repeat it until it becomes part of who you are. Because the moment you start living what you learn, your entire identity begins to shift, and when your identity shifts, your results have no choice but to follow. You are not behind. You are not stuck. You are simply one decision away from a different direction, one habit away from a different life, one action away from a different future. But that change only happens when you stop waiting and start executing what you already know. Believe in your ability to grow. Trust the process of small, consistent actions. And never underestimate what happens when a focused mind refuses to quit on itself. Thank you for taking the time to connect with this message. I wish you strength, clarity, discipline, and unstoppable momentum as you move forward in your journey. Good luck on everything you are building, everything you are becoming, and everything you refuse to give up on. And if this message resonated with you, make sure you follow my channel, Mind Wealth Theory, for more powerful content that will challenge your thinking, sharpen your mindset, and push you toward real results.